I owe an apology to Camille Flammarion. I know it's a bit condescending to apologize to someone who died nearly 100 years ago, but in this line of work you do get attached to your subjects. In my video, Planet X Conquers the Martians, I implied, quoting a January 1910 article in the New York Times, that the Gallic science elucidator was responsible for the worldwide panic that accompanied the return of Halley's comet in 1910. So close would Halley approach Earth that year that astronomers predicted that Earth would, on May 18th, actually pass through its tail. According to the New York Times, Flammarion had claimed that the deadly gas cyanogen, recently identified in Halley's tail, would, upon touching the Earth, quote, impregnate the atmosphere and possibly snuff out all life on the planet. This statement is, as I will show, an outright lie, which, coming from a supposed paper of record like the New York Times, demonstrates the frankly terrifying absence of journalistic standards at the time. If any paper, let alone the New York Times, tried that today, it, and a lawsuit, would be the last thing it ever did. So why, you might ask, am I bringing this up now? Is it not just a little obsessive to issue corrections on an 8-year-old video? Well, I recently came across a book, published last year, by the historian and writer Richard J. Goodrich, called, somewhat bluntly, Comet Madness: How the 1910 Return of Halley's Comet almost, in brackets, destroyed civilization. In it, he presents a spirited defense of Flammarion, who, he argues, despite being tarred for centuries as the man who cried comet, was the blameless victim of a scurrilous and venal press culture. A not unfamiliar fate to us today. As someone who has spent much of his later life communing across the ages with figures past, I felt I owed it to him to clear his name. That is not to say that I hold Camille Flammarion completely blameless in this debacle. For those who don't know, Camille Flammarion was a French amateur astronomer and writer whose space in the public sphere was similar to that of Carl Sagan. He presented the wonders of the universe to the public in a fashion that piqued their interest. And that, in many ways, was his downfall. Unlike Carl Sagan, who was notoriously irritated by pseudoscience and woolly-mindedness, Flammarion embraced such concepts as spiritualism, and often overwhelmed his scientific communications with personal explorations far beyond the boundaries of fact. Such was the case here. Comet panics are as old as human civilization, possibly as old as humanity itself. They have been recorded in history as far back as ancient Greece and Rome. Even after Edmund Halley cracked their nature in the 17th century, people still saw fit to declare them harbingers of doom. My life alone has seen 2 comet panics. The first in 1997, when the arrival of the comet Hale-Bopp led to the mass suicide of the Heaven's Gate cult. The second, with the eternally recurring Nibiru conspiracy, which to date has enveloped 2 comets. The point is that the hysteria accompanying Comet Halley in 1910 did not start with Camille Flammarion. The papers had already done an effective job of misquoting scientists, and we have never needed scientists to rationalize our fears. Flammarion's responsibility in this debacle rests almost entirely on an article he published in the Paris edition of the New York Herald in November 1909. The bulk of the article was simply stating the path and timing of the comet's arrival. But then, as he often did, Flammarion crowned a sturdy scientific treatise with an ill-advised flight of fancy. To avoid bias, I shall reproduce it in full. Since comet tails range from 30 to 50 million kilometers in length, it is clear that the tail might envelop us for several hours. What will be the result of this meeting, of such an immersion? There is no need to rehash the various ways a comet could snuff out all life on Earth. What would be the point? From the mechanical, physical, chemical, and thermodynamic viewpoint, we may at once acknowledge that we know nothing of the fate reserved for us next May. The poisoning of humanity by deleterious gases is improbable. Doubtless, if the oxygen of the atmosphere combined with the hydrogen of the comet's tail, it would mean universal death with a short shrift. If, on the contrary, there resulted in a diminution of the supply of nitrogen, the brain of every one of us would experience an unexpected sensation of physical activity, and the human race would come to a sudden end in a paroxysm of joy, universal delirium, and madness. At bottom, probably overjoyed at its state. Carbonic oxide, on the contrary, would cause universal poisoning of the lungs. Flammarion hastily added in his conclusion that, quote, anxious minds have no reason to be tormented, uselessly too, by those prognostications. Comets, it is true, are immense, but they are so light, so rarefied, that the terrestrial atmosphere is like lead in comparison. This is true, and the standard riposte of astronomers at the time, but it didn't matter. The press had a renowned science writer, in print, saying how everyone could die when the comet arrived. Within days, gutter press the world over was citing Flammarion as having said the world would end. On February 1st, Flammarion attempted to stem this tide, writing a follow-up article in which he stated, in lead balloon terms, quote, I would like, first of all, to warn the French and foreign journalists against the temptation to which they have already yielded, that of accusing me of announcing the end of the world on May 19th next. The end of the world will not occur on May 19th next. And yet, Flammarion simply could not help himself. He followed up that unequivocal statement with, quote, learned men have recently offered the fallacious view that, since the Earth has passed through comet tails in the past, as it had in 1864, there could be no possible danger from Halley's comet. This reasoning is fantastical. It is similar to claiming that because the autobus that plied the route between Barcellones and the Odeon had not run over anyone in 1909, it wouldn't kill a pedestrian in 1910. If Halley's comet has done nothing to us until now, it is, first of all, because we were not in the way, and it did not meet us. It is a mistake to believe that something would not happen simply because it has not happened in the past. There is, I think, admirable inductive caution, and then there is needless fear-mongering. And in my opinion, that paragraph crosses the line. The overwhelming store of evidence showed virtually beyond doubt that Halley would not harm Earth. And as Sagan himself was fond of saying, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and Flammarion offered none. He did go on, as he had previously, to list the reasons this was unlikely. Quote, we shall traverse the gaseous tail as a cannonball traverses a light fog, and the comet's approach to our planet might concern the aliens living on Venus or Mars, but since they probably believe the Earth is uninhabited, they might not even pay attention to the event. Given that he actually believed Venus and Mars to be inhabited, I don't think he was being sardonic there. 1 week after Flammarion rebutted himself, his reputation received its most crippling wound. On February 7th, Halley came close enough to Earth for spectrographs of its tail to be taken. Among the many substances identified in the tail was cyanogen, which, as you can probably tell from the name, is a deadly poison. The press exploded. 1 day later, the New York Times published its now immortal Ragstain. Quote, Flammarion is of the opinion that cyanogen gas would impregnate the atmosphere and possibly snuff out all life on the planet. This is simply not true. When Flammarion had speculated about Halley snuffing out all life on the planet, cyanogen had not yet been identified in Halley's atmosphere. Today, if Camille Flammarion is remembered outside the francophone world, it is probably in connection with that cyanogen claim. That is unfair, as he was a visionary who opened the public's eyes to the wondrous possibilities of the universe. Yet it was his need to explore those possibilities, even in combustible times when discretion was the entirety of valor, that made him an inadvertent vector in the cometary mind plague of 1910.